last years of the 19th century, that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Broadcasting live
from a tiny studio somewhere in North America.
This is Dark Matters Radio Live. And now I give you your host,
the silverback of ufology.
Here's Don Ecker.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome back to another Dark Matters Radio. I think tonight's broadcast is going to be one for the books. Okay, my guest is Mr. Douglas Morris. Now, Douglas has quite a bio, and allow me to say this. I was first introduced to Doug probably, 15, 20 years ago when I was broadcasting DMR, Dark Matters Radio, on Cyberstation USA. And back in those days, for quite a while, I was broadcasting 5 nights a week. And we would open the telephone lines with my guest, whoever my guest was at that time. And often I would receive a call from Doug in Tokyo, Japan. Tokyo, Japan, absolutely. Because Doug is a now retired 32-year veteran of the United States Diplomatic Service. He worked in the State Department. And some of the areas he worked in were concerned with things such as nuclear nonproliferation, conflict resolution, democracy, elections, human rights, scientific and space cooperation, all the things that we talk about today. And he then attended the National Intelligence College for working on his master's degree. He wrote a paper which was published, and by the way, we have it, I have it here, the Anomalous Human Cognition, a possible role within the Crucible of intelligence collection. Now, what the hell does that mean? Well, it was dealing with that very esoteric situation involved with remote viewing. Remote viewing, the Stargate program, and a number of other titles that went back all the way to Stanford Research Institute, SRI. Now, in Stanford, one of the people, actually a couple of people that were brought into it ended up being, depending upon how you look at it, downright scary. Okay. First guy I'm going to mention was a fellow by the name of Pat Price, former Burbank police commissioner. A lot of other very strange things surrounded him. And then a guy that I got to know personally. You've heard me mention his name a number of times, a fellow by the name of Ingo Swann. Now, Ingo Swann was the guy that basically put together the protocols to teach candidates the art, if you will, of remote viewing. Swann later wrote a book that I got a copy of in 1998 called Penetration by Ingo Swann. And I have mentioned that on this program a number of times. That book will send your world swimming. By the way, that book today, for the most part, is impossible to get a hard copy of. Howsoever, if you put in Ingo Swann's name, Swann, and the book's title, Penetration, you can find it in a PDF format on the internet. Now, if you have not read it, if you do have an interest in some of this esoteric business, I strongly suggest that you try to track down a copy of that PDF file, download it, then secure yourself someplace comfortable, open that up and start reading it. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about those very things. So without a lot of further ado, let me bring on my two co-hosts that are with us each week, Mr. Mark Center, Mr. Gary Cassell, and our guest, Mr. Douglas Morris. Doug, it is truly a supreme pleasure you're here. Thank you so much. I tried to get Doug on the show before. He was still employed. I guess he felt that that might not have been a good thing to do while he was still in government service. However, not too awfully long ago, and we hadn't spoken or communicated in quite a while, he got in touch with me. And I said, well, by God, this would be a great time if you're up for it. We checked dates, and ergo, here he is. Doug, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Don. Thanks much. I appreciate the chance to meet Mark. And is it Gary or Jerry? I'm sorry. Gary, I've got it. All right. Thank you.
But we call him Gary because everybody that sees his name says, oh, Jerry. And he'll say, no, Gary. So Mark and I, well, actually, it was Mark that started the Gary. So.
Yeah, no, going to your point, as to why I wasn't quite open to discussing the thesis. There were a fair number of people who actually didn't think that coming out with this thesis and focusing on this topic would be beneficial to me in the career going forward. I have to say, I don't think it caused any problems really whatsoever. I purposefully, I could have made this a classified thesis. Many of the theses coming out of what was, for the last year, National Defense Intelligence College, this is what I graduated from. But it had already been approved to change to National Intelligence University, if anybody's familiar with the new term. That happened the immediate semester after I graduated. I could have easily made it a classified document. A lot has been made public, declassified. There's still an interesting amount of things behind that curtain that have not been released. That said, after speaking with Ingo, when I interviewed him for the thesis gathering data, he specifically asked me, encouraged me to try to do it unclass, just so it would have a potentially wider reach. Because anything that goes classified just goes into the black hole, and you got to have somebody dig for it, right?
I didn't realize that at one point this program was encompassed by a SAP. When I read that, I was like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
holy moly, that's about as highly classified as you get.
Yeah, I think that was still center lane. Yeah. And then they made the shift. Maybe it was Sunstreak. It might have been Sunstreak. The whole program comes under a bunch of different names. I can kind of go into it a little bit. I would just encourage people to read that second chapter. They can ignore all the rest of it if they really want to know the history of how it broke down. But breaking it out of the SAP and trying to make it what they call LIMDIS, limited distribution program. The focus, the intent of that, it wasn't declassifying it, but it was bringing it to a wider audience than a SAP will ever have. And the hope had been that by doing so, other members of the intelligence community, the IC, would decide to make use of the product, the work that they were doing under that. Said, taking it out of the SAP and making it a LIMDIS program probably made it easier at the end to put the kibosh on the whole project in 1995.
Well, speaking of SAPs, okay, about a week or two ago, I sent you 2 papers I wrote.
Yes.
One on disclosure, one on the Eric Davis Thomas Wilson conundrum. Okay, Wilson, former director of DIA, didn't hear back from you. And in my disclosure document, I suggest that the entire UFO phenomenon, starting almost from when it was universally recognized back in 47, although it's been around forever, that very likely a core secret, an element of this, was discovered by the powers that be, that basically made the decision that whatever this information is, this data is, that it can never reach the public. Ergo, it's very likely encompassed by an SAP. What was your overall conclusion about that?
So, I mean, the term core secret, I mean, I read, Beckham's book as well when it first came out. And so I was familiar with his view, his terminology as well. So that helped me following, reading your paper. I think, going just to Wilson's actions, if the memo is accurate, and I have people, friends, and acquaintances who actually are quite familiar with Eric Davis, Dr. Davis, who are utterly convinced that the man is, he's pretty much beyond reproach when it comes to being honest. He probably, if anything, is maybe too honest, too open. I hear that several times. I have never had the pleasure of meeting him myself, but I have friends who have. If that information is true, the reaction that Wilson received when he tried through a couple of methods to gain access to that information that you would assume is part of the whole UFO UAP program, and he was presented kind of with the position of you're going to retire pretty soon. It'd be a shame if something happened to that lovely pension of yours and that rank that you've got right now. And he backed off. If that's a story within the Wilson Davis memo, that's very believable. It actually is very much how that sort of thing is protected within the government organization itself. On the outside, the SAP itself is surrounded by many, many layers, depending on if it's an undeclared SAP. The money going in, nobody really.
Well, all SAPs are undeclared, Douglas.
Well,
they have
yes,
to be by law.
Yeah, they are. But I'm trying to think. I'm mistaking the word. I used undeclared. That's not the term I was really trying to pull. And for the life of me, being 60 now, Don, the word isn't coming to me quite as fresh as it did a few years back. But it's basically, I think the cocoon around the program easily protects it from the outside, easily protects it from Congress and congressional oversight. Bigger concern is insider threat to a SAP. Hopefully people don't have access to enough pieces of the information. It's broken up in these small pieces. Very, very few people have more than a couple of the elements of whatever the SAP is working on. Hopefully one or two may know what the entire thing is about, but that's about it. That's the number one way they protect it inside. Inside the government is just by, need to know is the way it's broken out. But if necessary, threats like were supposedly, leveled against Admiral Wilson, it's an easy hit and an easy target. So it makes sense.
Hey, Doug, just a little sideline here on the SAPs. A quick outline, if you even know. If you don't, that's fine. What's the process and what does it take to declassify or bring out to the open a SAP? Something covered by SAP?
That's a great question. I know that part of the problem is that the people you would assume, would have the authority to make that decision. They know enough about the program to make the decision that yes, we can eliminate the SAP. Most of them themselves are totally unaware of what's going on in the SAP. So, you really have to want somebody inside the SAP itself at a fairly significant level within the SAP has to want to bring it out of the SAP. And that's kind of what happened, Don, as you were mentioning within the RP program. It was pushed from inside to pull it out of an SAP. Not to make it unclassified, not to make it available for, you, me, other people, but to make it something called LIMDIS, limited distribution, purely within. So I think it's, and that's just the remote viewing program. The UFO, UAP, SAPs. I mean, I can imagine there being so many different elements to that are not connecting at all to any of the other elements. And there hopefully is one or two people who at least have a bigger picture of it, but I have no idea how that would be.
And of course, that's by design. That's by design. Exactly. You tell as little as you can to as many people as possible, and it's like, well, why bother? I'm just going to move on with my life.
Yeah, and if it's if you're coming up on retirement age, that pension's not bad. You might want to do everything you can to protect it at that stage.
Well, what about my conclusions on the disclosure paper?
I mean, I see exactly where you're coming from with it. I mean, it's a position that back in the old debate days when I was in high school and college, I could have argued that position that you took in that paper quite effectively, and I think you did as well. I have to say, for myself, my own personal feeling about, and maybe it's I don't know. It could be old age hitting me, or I was kissed by a unicorn or something. But I just have a feeling that there's a substantive difference between what's occurring right now than has happened at any time in my lifetime. There were other moments in time in history. I mean, Richard Dolan covers them very well and in his books, where there were people early on the inside who wanted to make these elements, some of these elements known, be more disclosing, if you will, of the data. And that was shut down very tightly. It's a different world that we live in now. I think it's really interesting, the number of purported whistleblowers that seem to be willing to at least speak, within a skiff to people in Congress, even if they're not willing to, describe any of that, much of that stuff to us.
Well, yeah, but surprisingly enough, a lot of those whistleblowers are second and third hand witnesses. They have yet to bring anybody forward who identifies themselves as a first-hand witness. Yes, I saw the material. I saw the biologicals, the bodies. They haven't brought them out.
I think the closest. So I know that George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell have indicated that they know people who are firsthand. They have not gotten to the point where they will actually come out and put pen to paper, word to video. But I was impressed and was struck by James Lukatsky and his interview with Corbell and Knapp, where they kept pressing him and he kept dodging him. It's a real fascinating to watch if you can get on YouTube. But at one point, he basically cops to having set foot inside of an actual craft. And for a guy who was dodging so many easier questions earlier, that's just stuck out to me as really unusual. And he hasn't come out and said that he misspoke or anything in the time. Well,
I got to tell you, right now, I am probably as cynical about most of this as
perfectly understandable
as I've ever been during this entire trek that I've been on. But in 1970 through 72, I was a member of the United States Army Security Agency in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam. And we were conducting a lot of intel type programs, if you will. And primarily we were attempting to collect data, information, everything from radio intercept to human intelligence. And I got to say, I got a fairly good working knowledge on how all this worked. NSA was our command authority, not the Department of the Army, the National Security Agency. Doug, I'm sure you know that.
Yes.
And so when I see what's been going on here, especially the last 10 years, somewhere along the line, I smell a big Pentagon rat. Okay? A lot of this, I think, like with Luis Elizondo.
Security.
Luis Elizondo and Mellon, Christopher Mellon, and even the guy, I can't think of his name, from the Skunk Works. And for God's sake, Hal Puthoff.
Yep.
Okay? Let's not kid ourselves. Now, I don't think any of those people that I just mentioned were on the very tippy top of the spear of this intelligence stuff. But I think it's very likely they've all been briefed to lay out a certain agenda. I think that they've been, in many regards, manipulated, if that's what it took. And I just think it's Well, I'll be very honest. I think that right now, probably 90% of all of this quote unquote disclosure, maybe even higher, maybe 94%. Douglas, I feel it's pure bullshit.
I think it's an easy position to take, quite honestly, from your side, which is why I said I could have argued your paper very effectively in the debate stage, because I think there's more than enough reason and cause to feel exactly the way you do. I will say, quite honestly, I hope that now, whether we get to something like they continue to refer to it as, catastrophic disclosure or controlled disclosure. I mean, you've got all these terms going back and forth at the Sol Foundation, meetings, and Jay Stratton and, all the folks talking about it. Again, all I can say is I do feel that now, whether what I'm feeling is a difference in what the government is doing, I really don't think the government wants to release any of this. They never. Are they
still in control though? Because you and I both know that all this material, was farmed out.
Yeah, Raytheon
was farmed out to these guys, and they are not answerable to things like FOIA requests or anything else.
That's plausible deniability.
That's why they were. That's one of the reasons why things were farmed out to them. There are a couple of others. Obviously, the U.S. government has some difficulty in I think, number one, bringing people in on something that's so totally, tucked behind a SAP, and bringing enough people in who can, you can't even bounce ideas off of each other within a SAP, because I'm working on a piece that this other person may have something that would be connected to it, but we're not allowed to even talk about what we're doing. You're not going to make progress that way. At least within the company, you could possibly.
That goes exactly to Bob Lazar, whether you believe him or not.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay. That's what Lazar said when he was at S4. He was working on a certain item. Okay. And they were not allowed the free exchange of ideas or information among the staff there. So you're absolutely correct.
But it's worse than that, Don. If I'm to take this to its logical end with people like Lazar, he was covered under a SAP. So for him to do any of this stuff, to say any of this horse shit, was so beyond the pale, and yet he's still in Vegas. He's still doing his thing. So it's a very confusing, the SAP thing's confusing. I suppose, like you've said before, they can use it to their benefit one way or the other. Throw them in jail, make them disappear, or feed them what to release.
If I may, just real quick, I think to your point specifically, and what I mentioned earlier about the greatest threat actually to the inside, into the SAPs, are the insider threat, the person inside coming out with some information or whatever. That's the one piece that they have a great fear of, no matter what the SAP is. And that was really, I think, the impetus, at least if you hear George Knapp and Lazar talk about it, of him actually, the only protection he had was to actually talk to Knapp and get that information out. Now, that's a hell of a gamble. Would I have taken that gamble? I like watching George. I'm not sure I would risk my very life and the life of my family and children to come out on that. But yeah, it goes to that insider threat questions. Basically, what I was wanting to get to.
Well, with reading your stuff, Don's background, I'm getting a little tired of the term evidence that's thrown around with the whistleblowers and things, right? Because we all want physical disclosure, right? What we're getting is anecdotal disclosure, stories. To the vast extent, Lazar's was a story, he did bring some folks out there and they saw something in the sky and things. So that goes to another direction. But with your research into chapter 2, and of course Don can chime in on this. How important were these stories as opposed to nuts and bolts, feet on the ground research?
Yeah. Am I the only one who's hearing the
Yeah, I can hear that too. There's a bunch of noise.
Anyway, I just have to double check occasionally.
Maybe the NSA is not happy about this, Doug.
That wouldn't be the first time I think they've been unhappy with me in my career. And I don't have a career now, so that's perfectly fine.
There you go.
So it's very interesting. I mean, the stories. Now you're talking are on the RV side as opposed to, because I mean, chapter 2
that
is really
and in general. I mean, it must be very, very concerning and maddening where we want the physical, whatever you might be talking about, right? There's physical in RV too, I would assume. Yeah, it's over there. Let's go get it type of thing, right? But it seems everything seems to be polluted with stories.
Yeah, I think within the confines of chapter 2, the time periods that we're talking about, I am as confident as I can be, not being a first-person witness to every event that is described, but that not just within the government records themselves, which, I spent a pretty penny getting the entire unclassified records for a copy for myself, so I could go through. I could match up pretty much every story that people were telling me during interviews with reports that had actually been submitted and issued. Obviously, I heard things that I did not put in the paper and would not have put in the paper. Things that would have. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't believe what I was being told, because these are the same highly credible people who were telling me the other stuff, the other 99% of the things that I was able to independently verify through government reports and the like. But at a certain point, again, why did I write the paper? Ultimately, it was kind of as a flyer, a pamphlet, as somebody referred to it once, to the world about a program that, quite honestly, I'm quite confident did not die in 1995, but was rather moved, probably back into even a deeper and probably darker sap than the one it was originally in. And there's some evidence to point that way. I mentioned to Don that I have there's a long footnote in the first page of the last chapter where I address kind of this, this outlier issue of, could this program still exist somewhere within the government? And it actually was very interesting because it came from Jim Marr's book, and it had been told to him by Ingo. And when I pointed to that text, that footnote, and I was in Ingo's house in New York City at the time, and it was actually endearing to me, but he was deeply, deeply distressed that he had said what he had said. He never knew that had actually been put in Jim Marr's original book. And I had to kind of try to calm him down a little bit and tell him, look, I don't think, you haven't heard anything from anybody.
What was distressing him about it?
That he had basically, disclosed something that should not have been
supposed to. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
So he was worried about blowback.
Well, and again, Ingo, to his dying day, viewed himself as an uber patriot, right? I mean, it was whatever the government needs us to do, let's go forward. Let's get this done. And what it was basically the existence post 95 of another group of people who were qualitatively, if not quantitatively, different from the original folks that were trained in RV whose identities are known to us now, and who are out there. People like Paul Smith and Tom McNair and Lynn Buchanan and a few others, right? And that he trained them in these areas, and that some of these people came with architectural backgrounds, drafting backgrounds, artists, all the things that actually help them translate the information that they're getting through CRV or RV into something that people can see, right? And we can get into how that information flows. I'm happy to discuss that at some point.
Well, Douglas, there is one thing that I definitely wanted to ask you about.
Please.
Over the years, when we were still publishing UFO magazine, I ended up at one time or another talking to a number of these former RVers, McGonigal, Paul Smith.
McMonigal.
Huh?
McMonigal, yeah, Joe.
McMonigal, yeah, I'm sorry. And the one thing that I often was I had an oh wow moment when they would be working on a certain target, okay? Suddenly, what appeared to be a UFO would pop into that. The one that I'm thinking about primarily now was, it might have been McGonigal, that was RVing what was believed to be a Soviet submarine. And suddenly there was a disc-shaped object hovering above it. I'm sure you know what I'm referring to, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
How often did those things, because there seems to be a correlation there somehow. Yeah. Now, what Ingo told me at one point was that these visitors, if you will, I hesitate to call them ET, that might be what they are, but who knows, are extremely psychic. And he told me that one of the things they were basically not happy with humanity is because they saw us as a potential threat because of our innate psi talent. All right. That could have something to do with it, but I'm interested where you come down on that.
No, I know the incident you're referring to. That is one of the stories. Now, I was not able to, backtrack to an actual unclassified document, the report of that reading of the submarine. That's because it was not one of the pieces that were released and declassified. It would be my assumption, because I found no other reference to that particular reading at all. It was just not amongst the documents that were released.
By design, no doubt.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are already some very shocking things within the declassified RV program. There's precognition, there's postcognition, there's all kinds of very fascinating things in it. Throwing the UFO, phenomenon into the mix was something that I knew would not help me get my pamphlet out of the, National Intelligence University, DIA. And I did want to get that degree, and I wanted to complete it, so I didn't include things like that. But it certainly didn't mean that I didn't talk with people about that. Now, why is it that these things happen? Why is it that the viewer may be on a target and suddenly feel pulled to a different target? I think it kind of goes back, and I talked with Ingo about this, and I hesitate to say he agreed 100%, because I'm not sure he ever agreed 100% with anything that I said, but he basically agreed. You go back to the Shady Sugar Grove reading, right? What were they given? They were originally given blind coordinate targets to a vacation cabin owned by a friend of Kit Green's at the CIA, and they were go read that. Now, what was at that point? What was at that place? It was a cabin. It wasn't anything spectacular or interesting. But what was right next to that? Something phenomenally interesting. And why is it that both Ingo and Pat, taking that same, blinded target, both went to the exact same spot? And it has, I think some others agree, some don't, quite possibly has something to do with a very human element, which is curiosity. Something that's exciting, something that's interesting, something that's different, right? And so that might be why, yes, the submarine's very interesting, but, if you get something right over the top of it, that the viewer might find themselves drawn to seeing the far more interesting thing above, right? That's something that has happened numerous times, including, like I said, Sugar Grove, which was not a UAP incident, but it was a good example for two of the finest remote viewers known. They both were sucked into viewing that because it was far more interesting, I think. Now, the issue of psionics and whatever is, NHI. Do you object to the term NHI?
No.
Non-human intelligence.
No.
NHI and psionics. I think that's something that many people, particularly those who have within the experiencer world, and you may dismiss many of them, maybe all of them. You may know somebody that you trust to, believe in, that confides in you that they're an experiencer and they've had something. Well, then that kind of puts you in kind of an awkward position. Where do you go with that? But they almost to a letter, they don't. It's very rare to have instances where the NHI is speaking in a, using vibrations in the air, right? It does happen. There are a few I've encountered, but most of them are not. Most of them are in the psionic realm. Are we a danger to them? I mean, okay, Ingo very much, that second chapter, the second half of penetration is focused entirely on that issue. And it is, I dare say, probably only 20 or 30% of people actually get through the second half of penetration. That first half is a barn burner, like you said. You can't put it down, you just read through it. But that second half is where he's going into the psychic abilities and the repression that he sensed, because he too, as you had indicated, you didn't have a memory of your incident until years later, that we were talking about, not related, but memories came later. He had that with what happened to him with Axel. And he describes that also in his book, that it just, why did I not care? Why didn't it bother me? It's like, and that leads kind of into that second chapter. But what are we dangerous about for them? I mean, I think I'm very interested in the video, the recently scrubbed video of the bluegill test out in my old stomping grounds of the Marshall Islands area, where you have a detonation and something you can see actually drop, out of the sky towards the ocean. I think we can be a threat. I think that's quite possibly a real video. It's never been, I think, effectively debunked in my mind.
Something EMP. You think it might have dealt with EMP?
So it could be. Also, that particular device had a massive amount of X-ray energy and gamma coming off of it. So I think it's not just the EMP function that you get with these things, but that device was, had a few unique characteristics to it. But you can look it up online and see the original video of the detonation for decades that you could access covered up that dropping, whatever it was. Only recently did somebody get their hands on the non-clouded version, where you can see this thing drop. It's worth taking a look at, and you can decide for yourself what you think of it. But that's dangerous.
Regarding
that's something that,
some current stuff, a two-part question with psionics is what is similar in your view of psionics and remote viewing, both in the process and yada, yada, yada. And I've noticed in psionics, there's a lot of these guys who seem very touchy-feely, like ecstasy type of stuff. And did you run into any of that stuff with the remote viewing as well?
So no, I would say I didn't run into any touchy-feely types. These people were quite serious.
Right, but did they ever give you a view of, while I was doing it, I was overcome with these warm embraces and things of that sort?
So there definitely are instances I came across, did not include in the paper, of people who were, emotionally affected and affected, both elements coming through by what they were encountering. Ingo told, and I think it's in a book. I'm not sure whose book it was. It might have been Schnabel, maybe it was Mars. I think referenced it, but Ingo shared with me as well. Him remote viewing a blind site and discovering it to be, sensing it to be basically a gulag with active torture happening to people. And he was so affected by it that he actually had to break out of the remote viewing incident and was in tears from the humanity of what he encountered there. There are other examples of that sort of thing. On the UFO side, on the UAP side, yeah, I have also heard from, I will say not directly from the mouth of the particular viewer. I'm not going to mention the name, but somebody who worked with him very closely and who contended that he also was overcome by an incident not dissimilar, not exactly identical, but not dissimilar from the one that Don, that you mentioned with Joe McMoneagle and the submarine viewing, encountering the non-human intelligence and being overcome by it. But yeah, no, the idea that a remote viewer is somehow disconnected from that sort of impact, I think is demonstrably falsified in the evidence that you can find. Most of them treated it very professionally, and most of them were being tasked with very straightforward things, right? I mean, Joe McMoneagle, being tested to, look inside of a large hangar at an airport, and then coming out and basically looking at the XM1 early edition tank, and finding it, in that spot. I mean, that's the sort of thing that the remote viewers did all the time, and there's not a lot of emotional impact from.
And it seemed like that was the main interest of the CIA and the Department of Defense was, could we gather, information about potential weapons, et cetera. But you said something right at the beginning of chapter 2 that took place in 1972, and it's like, you started talking about something, and it's like really short. With Nixon, with his emotional outburst in Soviet Russia and in China, and that may very well have been the Chinese and or Russians targeting him with this, ability that you're talking about, and that this is not something where you can just reach out and look at things, that these are possibly weaponized psychic abilities. And boy, I got to tell you, is there any sense from what you've read that the CIA and or the Department of Defense continued research into that area? Or is that just one big black hole that nobody knows shit about?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was tangential.
That's why I'm on the show, Doug.
It was somewhat tangential to the focus of the paper, but I do specifically point to particularly the Soviet Union, the government officials, and the scientists as well. Scientists were responding to the government officials above them, focusing on those areas that would be most utilitarian, I think was the word I used, for the state that was feeding them and keeping them alive for their research. And so a lot of that in the Soviet Union, and we believe in China as well, and some other countries conceivably even today, are on the things what referred to as kind of the dark arts of the psychic phenomenon, which basically boil down to, in a nutshell, it would be remote influencing. Now, the most ideal remote influencing that people talked about back then was, this psychokinetics. If we could just get that to work, we could do some amazing damage, to aircraft, to weapon systems, to whatever. PK is definitely, you go to the science chapter and I give a good rundown of just how robust statistically PK influencing can be. But in how many newtons of force you can apply within that thing, you may be able to move a die sufficiently to do something, but you're not going to be, at least so far, nobody's demonstrated the ability to use it in that fashion. Making, the president of the United States, influencing the president of the United States and high members of his government delegation that was with him. It wasn't just Nixon. There were others who also found themselves with, deep, deep sadness and crying that they could not explain. That was being reported. That is definitely remote influencing. If it was done, the fact that if they all saw the same really sad movie and it just hit them later, anybody could say that, but that's not the report we get back from the U.S. government. It seemed extraordinary to all of the individuals.
Out of character for Richard Nixon, he was a guy that pretty much kept himself put together. And to just suddenly be overcome emotionally twice, that's so odd. Right in the middle of this thing.
I believe Henry Kissinger talked about that at one point.
What did he have?
Where Nixon broke down. with
asked him to
Kissinger.
pray with him. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think there was actually a reason for Nixon to be crying at that moment, as opposed to possibly whatever happened in Russia or in China. We don't know which of the two. He visited both of those countries the year that this supposedly happened. So it could have been either one. The issue of difference between psionics and remote viewing that was asked earlier. I mean, clearly remote viewing is of a piece. It's a type of clairvoyance in the sense that you're gathering information from a something that you are not co-located with no other access to anything on the outside. And again, I can go into how does this maybe work? I mean, quite honestly, nobody really knows how it works. The chapter I was least satisfied was my science chapter, and say what you will, but Hal was very generous with saying, "Oh, I really liked that chapter." It's like, it's just terrible.
Well, Doug, before we get too much further, we got to go to break in mere seconds.
Sure.
So I don't want to have to cut you off when you're in the middle of something good. So when we come back, I'd like you to think about that rather amazing remote viewing session that Swann talked about with those mysterious MIB types, Mr. Axelrod and the twins. I think that is one of the most amazing things that he came out with. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, tonight, our very special guest, Mr. Douglas Morris. Doug is a veteran, 32 years with the United States Diplomatic Service, the State Department. We got another whole hour coming up, so stick around. We'll be back. And we are back. Welcome back. Okay. I guess before I jump to Doug, I may have said this previously, but I'm going to say it one more time. I originally became intrigued by questions of the moon, okay, our moon. And over the years, even before I was with UFO Magazine, people like Frank Edwards, if you don't know who that is, you might want to look him up, and others came out with books discussing anomalies, anomalous events, strange happenings. One of them, in fact, several of them dealt with areas on the moon where inexplicable lights and other things popped up. Now, during the Apollo program, NASA basically contracted out to a group of academics about lunar phenomenon that went back 400 years. That report, you can find it online. You can find references to it. NASA Technical Report 277. Now, I had in 1991-92 two shows that I did on my original radio program called UFOs Tonight when I was with CRN, the Cable Radio Network, that involved lunar questions, lunar phenomenon. And these two different shows with two different guests basically ended up launching me on an almost 20-year basically track of discovery, trying to answer to my own satisfaction many questions that I had. And in the magazine, UFO Magazine, over the years, I had written a number of articles discussing these things. For example, back in the mid-90s, I discovered something that no one had ever discussed or talked about, that our original astronauts, when they went to the moon, starting with Apollo 11, the lunar lander, when they went down to the surface, they were armed. They had military-style Model 1911A1 handguns, 45s, okay? Now, when I was first exposed to that, quite frankly, I didn't believe it. We finally ended up going to NASA, to the public, I believe it was the public affairs, whoever it was I talked to. And at first they didn't want to answer, but finally they did. Okay, yeah, they did have them. Well, why would astronauts go to the moon with weapons? Okay, why? I mean, that makes no sense. Well, what I was told was, well, you know, when they were returning from the moon, if something happened, and let's say they landed in a jungle, they had to have a means to defend themselves. And I said, land in a jungle? Since when did any of our Apollo missions land in a jungle? They always land in the ocean. Well, they had no comeback for that. Okay. Well, might it have been other reasons to take those to the moon? And you've heard many, many, many stories about that. But at any rate, I received a call from a guy back in New Jersey, a guy that put on UFO events by the name of Pat Marcatilio. And he asked if I would come back and basically give a talk on my lunar research. Well, I checked with my wife, Vicki, and we said, yeah, we'll do that. So we flew back, and I did it. And while I'm there, this guy came down and approached me. No idea who he was. Turned out to be Ingo Swann. Swann traveled down to Jersey from New York because he wanted to hear what I had to say. And ergo, that began a friendship that lasted basically until Ingo passed away. But at any rate, he had a friend of his, Robert Knight, guy that I knew and was very close. Knight was very close to Swann. Call me up. He was coming out here to the coast, the West Coast, to visit some family. Wanted to know if Vicki and I would like to go out to dinner one night. We did. And it was an amazing 4.5, 5 hour meal. We're in this little Italian restaurant in Burbank, lovely place. And that's a night I'll never forget. And during that time, we talked, and I had already read Penetration. We had received the book at UFO Magazine. Matter of fact, I read it by then, I think, 3 times, cover to cover. And so I had a lot of questions. And Swann told me he had a number of questions. So at any rate, there were 2 areas that I wanted to quiz him on. Number 1 was this, I don't know how else to describe it, but this amazingly beautiful, gorgeous, astounding female that he ran into in a grocery store, okay, while he was doing
Yeah, that wasn't by chance.
He saw this woman, his spidey sense, according to him, started to tingle. And as he walked up toward her, suddenly it became to him clear this woman is an alien. Okay? And he's nervous. He's not sure what to do. He looks around, and then he sees the 2 twins off at a distance, observing this woman and now observing him. Now, who the hell are the twins? Well, these were guys that apparently worked for this enigma, this mysterious man who went by the nom de guerre, Mr. Axelrod, who had Swann do a remote viewing on the moon. And I'm going to let Doug talk about that. But these guys were scary, and it freaked Ingo Swann out. And sure enough, he then got a call from Mr. Axelrod through a series of surrogates. And he basically was told, if you ever see that woman again, stay far, far away from her. She's very, very dangerous. So, okay, Doug, with all that being said, you're the guest. Where the hell did I go wrong if I did?
I don't think you went wrong. So I had read Penetration before I ever met Ingo. At one point in time, I shared with him that somebody that he knew within the program had publicly said on Coast to Coast, actually, that they didn't believe it was Russell Targ. Said he didn't believe Penetration, that Ingo was, very good at writing fiction, and that's what he was doing. Ingo convinced me that he wrote that first part of the chapter. He did not leave much out, is what he said. So most everything in it, or very slight variations, I would possibly grant, actually happened. He contended straight to my face, just him and me, and 2 cigars and some alcohol, that no, this actually did occur. So I think you got it right. I think very interesting elements of the story, that first half of Penetration, which is that key story that everybody is so enamored of, and rightfully so, that struck me immediately and struck him as well, even though he didn't really address it clearly within the book. But it was, or fulsomely, let's put it that way. He was clear. He just maybe wasn't fulsome. Was just how, now, Axelrod and his organization, what have you, become aware of these, facilities, if you will, on the other side, the dark side of the moon. It's easy to see how you would get that, right? Because we were mapping in Clementine? I can't remember. Mapping the moon very carefully. We saw things go up, but we saw things come down. We saw things move around. I mean, some of those books you referenced on are really, shocking. But you can see how he would get that information. What you don't get, but what clearly had to be true, is how did they know the woman was going to be in that supermarket? How did they know the date, time, and location when the UAP was going to come and collect water from the lake in Alaska, presumably Alaska? All of these things, that's not something you're going to pick up just by a mapping exercise. You have to have some very direct, straight knowledge, and that's something that's never clearly delineated or discussed terribly. And I think to me, it kind of enfolds, if you will, into the, maybe to what you were referring to, as that core secret. How long have we been engaged in discovery and interaction with NHI? At what point did we begin? How did that go? What were the elements and pieces? At some point, if Ingo is telling the truth, and I believe he was, we gathered information is clear and maybe clearer than we can gather on other humans in other countries, or even humans in our own country, right? You know, when somebody's going to a freaking supermarket, that's pretty damn impressive. Even more impressive if it's an alien, right?
Well, this sounds choreographed, Doug.
It does. That's another way of looking at it. Now, finding the woman, that would be pretty easy to gin up. I mean, I don't think Ingo is an easy guy to get rattled or have his spidey sense go off or things like that. But a very attractive woman in very skint clothing in LA, yeah, sure, that's not unusual terribly. How would they have ginned up whatever the UAP was that sucked up the water and then actually seemed to fire some sort of weapon in their general direction after noise was released? That's and particularly at that time, right? I mean, I think it's just a bit trickier. I get exactly what you're saying about the woman. No doubt, that's possible.
Well, okay. Now he is circa what, 1974, 75, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. He is contacted
at SRI. Yeah,
he is contacted through some people at SRI that he's going to be receiving a call. He's got to fly down to Washington, or well, he's got to go to a certain phone booth. He's directed ultimately to fly down to DC, where he's met at the National History Museum, picked up by these people, put him in a car, basically frisk him, put a hood on his head, and take him out to a chopper. They fly around for a while, land somewhere. He's taken to an underground facility, and he's offered a remote viewing job, $1,000 a day. And back in 75, that's pretty decent bread, okay?
Yeah.
And these guys know him. They have his favorite cigars, a bunch of favorite cigars there waiting for him, okay? And they tell him they want him to remotely view what turns out to be the moon. Now, Ingo was always very specific about this. I don't want to do a job if there's no chance I'm going to get feedback. Okay, I want feedback. I want to know. And he was assured, well, eventually you will have it. And it turned out to be, when it came, George Leonard's book, Somebody Else is on the Moon. Okay, that was Ingo's feedback. So he knew then that he was on the right track. But anyway, he finally agrees. He's sent up the coordinates on the moon. And Doug, please take it away.
Well, I mean, so he gets up there, through the process of a remote viewing, and different viewers will describe kind of the way it works for them differently. And I believe it maybe is quite different for some. And again, we haven't got to it, but the how remote viewing actually seems to work, and what Ingo was so amazing about was his introspection and his ability to figure his own internal workings out, ultimately led to the creation of coordinate remote viewing, CRV protocols. But he says he goes there, initially believes he's in, doesn't know where he's at, assumes he's missed the moon. He sees, like dust swirling, and that can't be. I mean, the moon doesn't have an atmosphere. How's that going on? When he finally, but later, of course, he did contend that there is, and I think we have discovered there is some very, very small layer of atmosphere there. And again, that links also to his viewing of Jupiter, right? where he was able to ascertain things that people said were not true about Jupiter before, we actually got the data back that proved that, no, he was actually correct. Jupiter
Very faint rings around Jupiter, yes.
Does have rings, right? I mean, it was very interesting. I think the only thing he said that has not yet been proven is that Jupiter has a rocky center. I think is what he sensed. But anyway, going back to the moon, he sees, this, the tire treads, basically the track treads in impressions in the dust. Initially feels like, oh no, the Soviets are way ahead of us at this point, because he's not thinking NHI at this stage, and then he gets a sense of the scale of what he is seeing as he kind of zooms out. At which point he becomes quite convinced, even before he encounters the entities, that this is not something that is being put here or put there at that time by any nation state of humanity. He perceives a group of people working physical labor, interesting, and was quite shocked when one of them turned around, going back to your point of, NHI having psionic abilities, turned around and seemed to see him directly, and drew the attention of all of the other individuals to him. Remember, he's not there physically. He's in an underground bunker somewhere, probably not too far from Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania would be my imagination. But he could tell they were very, very unhappy with him, and angry, I think, was the sense that he was getting. And he indicated that verbally, discomforted, concerned, and Axelrod told him to paraphrase, to get the hell out of there, to pull out immediately and come back. And that was really the extent of that, viewing episode. And of course, Ingo goes into how blown away he was by actually having seen what he saw and experienced what he experienced and encountered these individuals. But he was also, rightfully terrified. And then even later, no matter how skimpy the dress, terrified in the supermarket, right? It's had that same sort of feeling, he told me, that same sort of sense. So that's kind of in a nutshell what it was. And that was kind of the end of his remote viewing. I think he says it in the book too, but he told me as well that, he had some hope of having multiple days of $1,000 rolling through. It just didn't happen that way. But he did get paid the full $1,000 for that thing. But then later, he does have the incident in the supermarket, and he does get the book, the Leonard book, and then later is asked to accompany Axelrod and the twins on a flight north into what we presume was Alaska, but it's hard to say, where the incident occurs with the UAP UFO craft taking large amounts of water out of the lake.
Well, he said something to me, Doug, and I'm curious if he might have said the same thing to you. But that evening that we were having dinner, and I asked Ingo, I said, well, Ingo, after that situation, and I was talking about the remote viewing of the moon, I said, who do you think these guys were? CIA, NSA, DIA, NRO, Mossad, MI6, and he looked and he said, I don't know. He said, look, for all I know, they could have been E.T. And that kind of set me back on my heels. Did he ever indicate anything like that to you?
I mean, we talked a fair bit about, I mean, he used to refer, I can't remember, I think it might have been in Penetration, but he's done other things. The whole sort of space opera idea of multiple races here on the planet with differing agendas, and how do we fit in with each of them, or do we with all of them, or none of them, or whatever. And so I could see where he could maybe postulate that. If they were, I would venture that they did not need anything that he provided them. And so therefore I would probably be led to believe that they were doing their own version of a non-psionic psyop with him to get information out. But again, remember, he doesn't hook into anything about until later, that suddenly he remembers it, but it doesn't drive him to do anything. And then suddenly he does have a epiphany moment where he's just like, Jesus, I got to put this down. I got to write this down before it's gone. I mean, my own gut feeling, I could see where he could maybe say that. I'm not sure he believed that, honestly, that they were also aliens. Certainly his description of the twins as having been, that they weren't really twins. They just seemed to him to be, and by their motions and their actions. And I think he uses the word entrained. They were entrained very, very closely. Is unusual for people, but
maybe they were cybernetic.
Yeah, it's possible. But I mean, I've seen astounding, simultaneous formations by U.S. servicemen, in displays, right? And, things like that can be done with people as well. So, if I can throw one thing out just for fun, I would say his favorite cigar, tragically, at that time was Swisher Sweets, because they were cheap and easy to get.
Yeah, they're like,
and there wasn't any real
counter.
yeah, and they're god awful. They're not good. I will say that by the time I was spending time with Ingo at his place, and we were, talking and smoking cigars wherever in his house, he didn't care where it was. It's his place. The cigars were much better. Actually fabulous, and some of those were fabulous because I actually brought them. But anyway, that's just beside. But I did not see Swisher Sweets anywhere in his house.
I like to throw this out there. A lot of us would like to see real world results in a lot of this stuff, paranormal stuff, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So here's a example of what would be very interesting to happen. Non-governmental, non-NIH, none of that happy horse shit. So when they said that we were going to go into Fort Knox and see what was there, right? Now, evidently, we haven't done that, or maybe they did and they didn't like what they saw. But regardless, there is a Fort Knox, and there's either nothing in there or there's something in there, right? I postulated, wouldn't it be cool to get a bunch of these remote viewers to look at that ahead of time and then confirm or try to confirm whatever might be in the real world, right? Real world results, even to the point of having something in Maine, something in Florida, and something in Portland, the same thing, and having them do stuff like that. And I'm sort of unaware of anything like that that's been like boots on the ground. We did this, and these guys knocked it out of the park, and they found exactly what we thought that they would find. Now, is there examples of that?
Well, let me ask you, who do you mean by we did this? Are you talking about the government remote viewers?
No.
Somebody who purports to be a remote viewer.
Well, a group, somebody with some money, like the guy who used to own the Skinwalker Ranch, somebody like that who's got some money who could put this thing together, right? Because you don't need the government to do this, right? We always seem to go back to the government because that's where this information has come from. But has there been any results one way or the other of them actually multiple people finding whatever they were supposed to find in the real world, not on Mars 10 million years ago or the moon or whatever, but here? It's like, yeah, we all found the Lego train in these 3 different places.
Yeah, certainly. I don't know if you read through chapter 2 fully, but there are numerous examples of, and this is people in the RV program under all of its names, Gondola Wish and what was the other one? Grill Flame, Center Lane, all of these, eventually down to Stargate. Right. There are definitely very clear examples. Take a look at the trying to remember what was the breakout. There was a Tupolev 22 that went down in Zaire that we knew had crashed I believe it was in the 70s. And obviously a big part of our collections are collections of technology, right? You have the entire Air Force FTD, right? Foreign Technical Division, right? That's what they focus on. This was during Carter's time, and Carter actually publicly acknowledged and mentioned this incident as one of the really strange things that he couldn't explain that happened in his time as president, his single term that he had, was the recovery of that downed Tupolev bomber. And it was identified by 2 teams. It was SRI, I believe it was SRI, and FTD had their own in-shop remote viewing group of people. They tag teamed it, and they came within, I want to say it was like 3 to 4 miles in Zaire. Now this is now the Democratic People's Republic of Congo. It's massive. Mm-hmm. It's all jungle, covered completely. You can't see anything. Where our Mazint and measurement people thought it had crashed was something like more than 800 miles from where they actually found it. And this small group of people working together pointed to a spot on a map that led them to find the craft within a couple of miles. That's one example. There are many, many, many examples like that. The whole thing with I don't know if you read the General Dozier's kidnapping by the Red Brigade in Italy. The remote viewers working on that, Joe McMoneagle was still working at that time. That, by the way, is also one very clear instance of precognitive viewing, because like a week earlier, I may get the time for it, but I think it's like a week earlier, a guy who was a part of the SRI team by the name of Gary Langford was basically asked to take a look at something. And similar to what I was describing about, being drawn to something else because it seems more interesting, he actually reported out that there was going to be a kidnapping of an American official. I think he said in Europe. I don't think he said maybe Southern Europe. That's specific. But there's nothing we can do about it. But the military took it seriously enough. DOD took it seriously enough that they actually issued a warning. to everybody within that area of operation. It didn't help. Langford was correct. Dozier was kidnapped. McMonigal and a couple of others came up with a very careful description of the people that kidnapped him, the vehicle that he was kidnapped in and thrown in, the building that was being held in a city, and then the storefront, which is a very difficult thing to view. Remote viewer is the only one who really almost, I won't say the only one, because I don't know all remote viewers, but I'd say during that time, to be able to read or see lettering or things like that, extremely difficult to do for remote viewers. They also very often get left and right mixed up. Interesting points. I can talk about how remote viewing is actually believed to be a right brain function as opposed to a left brain function. The tyranny of the left brain makes it so difficult to do that. But Pat Price was able to actually read names, including some very, very top secret code word names for programs out of Sugar Grove. It's amazing. Anyway, the military did not, and the police did not follow those instructions. They found Dozier and rescued him through other means. But where they found him, and as he was debriefed going out, every point that McMonigal and his team had given them ahead of time, including the facade of the building and what floor he was on and what the room was and the truck he was kidnapped in, were confirmed, right? For something outside of government, but still one of the viewers, Joe McMonigal, and you can pull this up on YouTube. He became very popular in Japan when I lived in Japan. And he would show up from time to time on Fuji TV, and he would just take assignments from Fuji. And they had one that I remember distinctly, and it's probably one of the best ones I remember watching it being done, was somebody who their son was in debt and had skipped the debt and had run away and was clearly either dead or had a different identity or whatever. And the family wanted to reconnect with him. And Joe, in very short order, narrows it down to this guy doing work that he had never had any experience doing. I think it was being a fisherman. He nailed the village. He pinned about the time that the guy showed up there. Anyway, Fuji TV actually went there and found the guy actually in that village. So these things do happen, and there is other evidence out there. That's not to say that every remote viewing session is a success.
Sure,
and it is not. Right.
So
anyway, they do.
I've got a.
So why wouldn't they use this? Maybe they did, like on the Malaysian flight, right? I mean, that's a huge deal when that flight went down, and you would think if this was in our capabilities to some extent, some percentage, that things of that sort, they would go after it. That guy would go after it.
Yeah, I mean, who's to say they haven't? I mean, I don't think anybody reached out to. Well, I could be wrong. Maybe somebody did reach out to Joe or some of these other folks. The extent, old remote viewing community. There's a whole new crop of folks who have appeared. Some of which, I have a spidey sense that goes off occasionally with some of these folks myself.
And Don does too.
Yeah. So that's out there as well. But within the U.S. government, again, going back to that point that Ingo was so distressed about having revealed to Jim Mars, that post 95, there's this other group, and none of that group has ever come out like people have done in the original time frame and made themselves known. Those people are either still active in doing what they're doing, dead, or they love their pension and they don't want to cause any problems with it. Yeah, something like that, right?
Okay, so, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Doug.
Go ahead.
But I'm going to ask you a question. This is something that has bugged me for over 20 years, or around 20 years. I guess maybe it's 18 years. Back in about 97 or so, Art Bell, Coast to Coast, one of the biggest overnight radio shows ever. Okay. Now, I knew Bell. Matter of fact, he and I clashed several times. He saw me, I think he saw me as unwelcome competition when I was doing CRN, when I was on the cable radio network. But anyway, he had a series of guests that came on that show that were at best outright lunatics and at worst outright lunatics.
I'm going to guess in my own mind a name that you may please state, because I think I know who it is. Kind of like your physicist friend that I was able to guess. But anyway, give it a shot. Let me see.
I'll beat you to the punch. Ed Dames.
That's exactly who I was thinking.
Okay,
Ed actually appears in my thesis, and I refuse to name him. I simply talked about the guy who was running, like the man who was running Paul Smith when he had the precog viewing of the Stark being hit by the two Exocet missiles. Right? That's another of the great proven precognitive viewings. It was Ed Dames who was running him at the time. And it's like, I was going to be damned if I was going to put that name down in the paper.
Well, Dames periodically came on Bell's show.
Yeah, he did. I listened to a fair number of them.
Okay. And I'll never forget during the Hellbop fiasco, and the guy that originally sent Bell the photograph of the SLO, the Saturn-like object that he photographed, okay, was a guy by the name of Chuck Schrammick. Now, I knew Chuck. Chuck used to call my show all the time. And he was a character. He was actually in radio, had a tremendously prolific sense of humor, was funny as could be. And I talked to him after the Hellbop thing blew up into this major fiasco.
Yeah.
Which resulted in the Heaven's Gate mass suicide.
Yep.
Okay. But anyway, Dames came on Bell's show this one night talking about this comet releasing a container of, planet-killing pathogens.
Yep.
And the jet stream was going to lower itself down to Earth. There were going to be dead babies. Their cows were going to die off, and all kinds of bullshit. Bell never challenged him on any of it. Okay.
Yeah.
And he just kept it up and kept it up and kept it up. Now, a lot of people thought he was an RVer. He wasn't.
No. He was in the military at the time, but he was never somebody who was actually, trained. I mean, Ingo could be a phenomenally colorful individual. It was a blue streak a mile long if you raised Ed Dames' name anywhere around him at that time, when I was meeting with him anyway. I mean, the thing with Ed also, he always had, there was always the hook that somehow seemed to get into a lot of his things that but I know the place that's safe. Right. And for this small nominal fee, you can also be safe if I tell you where this one place that's going to be safe is. I mean, it's just it's. I agree with you. I remember listening to that and just losing probably 4 points of respect right off the bat for Art, not just calling BS on it. But he would do that, and then maybe some other point he would hang the individual somehow. But yeah, Ed was one of those guys who didn't get what was coming to him, in my opinion, from Art. So, but
well, he's basically disappeared. I haven't heard anything about Dames for years now.
And let's keep it that way. Let's just, maybe we're done with this.
We shall refer to him as he whose name shall not be mentioned.
So let's because of Don's experience as a detective and things, and what you're talking about here, what are the crossovers between psychics that detectives and police would use, because I'm hearing some of that in here, and remote viewing?
So, I mean, remote viewing is at some level, it involves a methodology. Now, the methodologies can be different, right? And it involves an altered state of consciousness in some fashion. Joe McMoneagle did not follow coordinate remote viewing, right? He had a little bit like Pat Price in some ways. He also had an innate ability that actually manifested before he became part of the program. But in essence, and Ingo, what Ingo did, he also could see these things, and what was fascinating was, they began with things like the old outbounder experiments, where it was like, okay, we get one person and that person's going to go to some secret location and nobody with the viewer is going to see where that is or know anything about it. And then they're going to have to say, where is this person? And then they realized at some point, okay, they could be very successful at that. But that was not going to be worth anything to anybody in the intelligence community, right? Because like when Pat Price does the Semipalatinsk viewing, where he sees the big crane, and the gantry and everything, and the giant 60-foot metal sphere that they're trying to create using these metal gores. If the only product they could do worked only if they could get another person who's part of your team to Semipalatinsk, everybody's going to be far more interested in what that human who actually got there physically saw than they're going to buy whatever the perceptions of Pat Price would have been, right? Yeah. So they had to come up with the methodology by what, did it work? Could we begin to see things that didn't have another, an outbounder or some other things, just random targets? Ingo contends, and I think a lot of people agree, that he came up with the idea of coordinates, and that's coordinate remote viewing is the C piece in it. After I wrote my thesis, I got some very, very nice emails from some very knowledgeable, important people, including Jacques Vallée, who had a slightly different view or remembrance of how coordinates came into play. But I had already written my thesis, so I wasn't going to rewrite it. But anyway, this idea that you could do coordinates, and there was this initial pitch backed by Hal and Targ and the CIA folks as well. It's like, how coordinates, how the hell would they work? They're man-made constructs. They're not even real, right? We just decide how we're going to divvy up the planet and draw lines on it, right? But
well, you worked. Say that. Can I add something here? Because you
Please.
Wrote in there that Ingo Swann wanted geographic coordinates, and
he came up with the idea of, because they were trying to figure out how to do this without outbounders, right? They needed to have something that would be of use to the IC, the intelligence community, right? And that would be to be able to get valid,
also
accurate
repeatable
impressions from someplace
also
far.
repeatable. If you have exactly, I remember seeing that in your writing, that it was something that could be tested later and be repeated because of geographics.
Yeah. No, it could be. But what's most fascinating about this whole thing, gentlemen, to me, and I think to everybody, was the progression, because they went from longitude, latitude, degrees, minutes. Ingo at one point contended, look, this is a problem because some of us actually do know kind of where the lines are generally. And so we could guess, like, that's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or, oh, that's somewhere in Australia or something like that, right? It's some of these areas. And that's actually terrible for remote viewing, because that then leads to what Ingo referred to, it's a whole noise versus signal, right? How do you determine what's actually signal and what's noise that you need to put away? And he came up with the term analytical overlay, or AOL, which I thought was funny because before AOL.
Right, before AOL.
Two things, Doug, two things.
Oh, please.
Number one, from your deep dive into this entire program and all the people you knew, and I guess in many regards still do know, if you had to pick what you thought was the most gifted remote viewer.
God.
Okay.
You don't like me, do you, John?
No, but this, I know Price's reputation, and he's been dead for a long time now. But and Ingo, Ingo, I have the utmost respect for. But who would you? Well, let's say, who would you put in your top 5? You don't have to number them.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that greatly. One of the individuals would be the person that Ingo contended developed into a better remote viewer than Ingo himself. And that was Tom McNear, who's a wonderful person. I met him, interviewed him, met his lovely wife. They live not very far, even from where I'm at right now, oddly enough. But Tom is one of the individuals, and I write about him in chapter 2 in the history. Ingo felt at one point, McNear's final test, he was not going to study under Ingo anymore. I want to say the number is 19 direct hits on the targets that were given, and including the actual naming of the target, what it was really, not just what it looked like or what the impressions of it were, but where it was, right? And Ingo was like, I don't think I've ever done that. So Tom McNair would be definitely, at the top or one of the top. Pat Price, look, the guy could do things. We could go into the issues of like, yeah, but who all was he telling what he was doing to, right? He had the Scientology. There's a lot of Scientology connections in there, but I think Pat was the only one that people, were pretty clear that he was sharing the information that he was engaged
What
with.
about Putoff?
Sharing with the Scientology?
Oh, yeah.
I saw no evidence of that. Quite honestly, I didn't dig into it too much once I decided that the whole Scientology side was, I came up with an angle that I could spin it into the thesis, and it would be, why are so many of these remote viewers, good ones, the top ones early on in particular, Scientologists, right? And what I came up with was, a hypothesis that maybe, the device that they use is basically biofeedback device, and, to be able to control your body with your mind is the key part of biofeedback, and there may be some easy peasy link between the two and the remote viewing phenomenon and access to that information.
I hate to tell you this.
I didn't go into it.
I hate to tell you this because I would love to go another hour.
You're convinced he gave intro.
You got to go again, Don.
It's the top of the hour. The show. Gotcha. We gotta stop. Will you come back?
Gentlemen, this has been a real pleasure. I mean, there's so much that we didn't touch on. It's kind of like our phone call. I think we were just all over. But I mean, it's all interesting stuff, and I would be more than happy to come back.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for tonight. I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast because I sure have. That's it for now. Remember, Thursday, 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 o'clock Eastern, UAP Crossfire. We'll see you then and have a great week. Good night.
God bless Sam and Dean Winchester. See ya.